Right, I think we'll start. I'm sure there'll be more people that join because there were a lot more people that booked for this event. But good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Samir Savant. I'm the festival director of the London Handel Festival, and it's a great pleasure to have you all here. I know that people have booked from Germany, the US, and from all over the UK as well. So everyone is very welcome. And we're going to be talking within the context of Messiah Reimagined, which is the project that we obviously inaugurated on the 3rd of December and are repeating on the 5th of April. But I'm delighted that we're joined by three members of the orchestra here: Adrian Butterfield, who's the leader and also associate director of the London Handel Festival, and Rachel Byrt and Kathryn Parry, who are both long-standing regulars. You are all muted, thank you for that, and the videos are switched off because we are recording this and we will put it up on YouTube so other people can see it. But please do introduce yourselves in the chat. Some of you have already, and it's wonderful to see so many of our colleagues and friends here as well. So everyone is incredibly welcome. So in terms of how this is going to run, we're actually just going to play a quick clip of Messiah Reimagined just to remind us of the glory of that event, and you'll see my colleagues in action. Great, thank you. Thank you very much. So obviously you all recognised David Blackadder in there on the trumpet, and it was the London Handel Orchestra. And my first question, and I'll come to you maybe, Adrian, first, is that was our inaugural presentation of Messiah Reimagined on the 3rd of December. It was very new to all of us. What were your impressions and thoughts kind of sitting there at the performance?
Well, I mean, the first thing was just to be back with all our friends and colleagues, making music again together, and in that space, and all that after a while was just such a pleasure. It was just so nice to see everyone, and of course to play such wonderful, uplifting, familiar music. A complete joy, really. It was different, no audience. Just a few people around, and yeah, so I suppose that felt a little strange, and of course no choir there that we could interact with directly, but an amazing feeling that all these people from around the world were sort of joining us virtually and celebrating this moment with us.
Great, thank you. And Rachel, the same question to you. How did it feel on the 3rd of December sitting there?
Yeah, it was wonderful, but familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. So whilst the music is familiar, having no choir in the room was strange. But also then knowing that this glorious backdrop would be transmitted, with us eventually, or was being transmitted live. That was absolutely fantastic feeling, and also it made the point of what is the point of being a musician. Well, it is to do this and to bring people together, and I think that was the overwhelming sort of joy really of that event for me.
Wonderful, thank you. And just to clarify for audiences as well, what you just heard was our Sing at Home choir who had pre-recorded all of their tracks, and it was being transmitted live through loudspeakers, and the players were all incredibly technically adept at playing along in real time. And on the 5th of April, we will have actually 500 singers from 15 choirs all over the world taking part in the overall project. And maybe, Harry, you could put a link into to register. So if any of you are interested in registering, I know lots of you have registered for the event as well, but please do via our website, and it's all happening again on the 5th of April. So Kathryn, same question to you. How did it feel on the 3rd of December?
So as Adrian and Rachel said, it was a total joy to be together again. And in fact, it was yesterday, a year ago, that we were in St. George's and we were sent home because Boris had announced that, well, he wasn't closing concert halls and theatres, but he recommended that people didn't go. So we were sent home, and so today, a year ago, was our cancelled performance of the oratorio, which we've been looking forward to so much. But back to Messiah, I think personally, I had no idea how much had gone into the tech for this. We'd recorded the choruses back in the summer between lockdowns, hadn't we?
Yeah.
And the team, Alex and Matt, were just so extraordinary and very kind of unobtrusive and discreet in that recording. But I think none of us could have had any idea of the impact. And Samir, you clearly had a vision. You got in there quite quickly, didn't you? Clearly had a vision of the future of possibly not just during lockdown, but possibly going, we can talk about this a bit later maybe, but the future of performance, which might have to integrate live and online music making. And actually, I was just a bit overwhelmed, not only by being together with those amazing soloists and my lovely colleagues and friends in the orchestra, but just the sort of impact and the potential, I suppose, for reaching all over the world, and the commitment of all the choirs. So it was overwhelming in many ways.
Yes, thank you, Kathryn. And my next question is about lockdown, life in lockdown, and maybe I'll start with you first, Rachel. You know, obviously everything changed, didn't it? As you say, Kathryn, it's a year ago exactly today that we would have been performing the Triumph of Time and Truth in St. George's, Hanover Square, Handel's Church, and we couldn't. The doors were shut. You know, people were told to go home. And it's been an awful few months, really, for all performers, you know, across all of the creative industries. Rachel, how has it been for you personally? How have you coped? You've got an amazing array of instruments behind you there, so presumably you were able to console yourself somewhat with those. But in general, how has it been for you?
Well, the first lockdown in March 2020, that was very strange for everybody. Of course, it was brand new. Nobody knew what was happening. All the concerts were cancelled, all sessions, everything stopped. So for a couple of weeks, I think people were in shock. And then gradually other musicians got in touch with each other. And a sort of rather wacky group of my colleagues from all around Europe decided to play scales together at 9:30 in the morning. And for 5 days a week, in all keys, 3-octave scales, on not just modern instruments, but on early instruments as well, at different starting pitches. So I brought all these, and it was in a way, people who play multiple period instruments at different starting pitches, be they violins, violas d'amore, whatever. It meant that we could keep them in a rotation of being played, because we didn't know how long the lockdown was going to go on for. So we'd say, okay, on Wednesday it'll be violins at 4:15, on Thursday it'll be violas at 4:40. For those people who don't understand what that means, it's a starting pitch. So the standard starting pitch for modern instruments is A440. So this viola here is tuned at A440. Others will be tuned flatter or sharper, depending on where in the chronology they come. So there's instruments here, this one, this one, this one. So that's 465, that viola, that's for 1600 Italy, for example. or too specific anyway. It was just a way of keeping all the instruments sort of in the groove and keeping them all going. And it was fun, and we kept it up for some weeks actually, until I realised there was probably more to life than playing scales. But that wasn't the only thing we did. So yeah, teaching I found was better, strangely, on Zoom, because you really had to think about how you were going to teach certain things. So I enjoyed having to really think much harder about how you might teach a certain technical aspect. Amazing what you can hear over Zoom, and how intently you have to listen. It's quite good in that regard. I wouldn't recommend it for the future, obviously, but you know, I think we all got used to it in a strange sort of way. New students, that helped. I did some playing with my other half and some later repertoire, Brahms and things, and had really far too much time in a way to really look at repertoire, which perhaps, you know, just does take a lot of time to learn. And to have that time has been an absolute luxury, I have to say. It's been wonderful. So, yeah.
Great. Well, it's amazing that you've been productive in a otherwise disquieting time. And Kathryn, has it been the same for you? Did you manage to get together at all and play?
Mixed, really mixed. Like Rachel, I've invested a lot of myself in my teaching, as much as for the well-being of my students as anything else, because they were struggling with homeschooling as well, and done a lot of sort of courses and online. Looked into a lot of resources for my teaching and attended a lot of sort of seminars and things. I'm in awe of some of my friends and colleagues for being incredibly proactive at making things happen online. My dear friend Sandy Burnett, who's actually here, I think, on this call, he started an online lecture series, the Listening Club, and we're exploring the Matthew Passion at the moment, which is amazing. And my friends in the Brook Street Band and Tatty, also very, very proactive in getting things going. There's a whole series of workshops and masterclasses, some of which I've participated in. The workshops, not the masterclasses. Well, I probably should. And so I've been very, very fortunate to be invited to do those things. And locally, a wonderful lady called Harriet Bennett, she runs a professional concert series in Felixstowe, in Suffolk, where I live. And Melanie Woodcock, who plays cello in the London Handel Orchestra, and I did a concert from my living room on Facebook. But I confess, apart from that, it's been really, really hard. I keep saying I'm going to start practicing again tomorrow. But I've lost my bottle in a lot of ways. You know, the initial disappointment of having all the concerts cancelled in the Handel Festival, that was a big shock for us all, of course. And then, yeah, I don't feel personally I've been very proactive, but I've been very fortunate to be included by some of my friends. So.
Great, thank you. And Adrian, you teach at the Royal College of Music, and you know some of this was in person teaching that carried on, not just online as well. And you've got all the other playing that you would normally do, both on the modern violin and baroque violin. So how was it for you this past year? How has it been?
It's been quite varied, and I think I've been quite lucky. Actually, I've done more concerts than I think probably quite a few colleagues, and things have turned out quite well. I suppose I've been quite proactive in trying to make some things happen as well. But I suddenly got this call from my quartet to play Beethoven's Grosse Fuge at the end of July in St. John Smith Square, and since we hadn't played together for quite a while, it was quite a thing. I mean, it was an amazing piece to try and sort of make your return to the concert platform with. And I think, you know, for the four of us, we're all struggling a bit, and to find a way of then getting together and doing that in a safe way and all that sort of thing, going through that whole process, and each individual in the group at different stages of coping with the whole situation. In the end, it helped us all enormously just to be able to meet and to play. So I've ended up playing all of Beethoven's late quartets during this time, which has been, of course, fantastic. The other thing that I've struggled with, I think, is the fact that everything now is videoed, and you know, you can hardly do a concert just for the people who are there, and take it or leave it, and that's the end of it, and off you go. You're now putting something down that may well be looked at for a long time to come, and I did really find that an extra big pressure, and I was just aware of it in the background. But Tilford Festival normally happens in June. I managed to do something online, as you know, Samir. You sang in that, where we put the Donna Nobis Pacem of the B minor mass together, and Kathryn and Rachel contributed to that as well. That was a lovely moment to see all those people that you hadn't seen or were hoping to see at that time and couldn't. And then I did manage to put on a Tilford Bach cantata concert in September, which was filmed and with audience. And it was just so lovely to see that audience there. I have to say there were some elderly people in that audience, pretty frail in terms of their health, who just wanted to come up and hug me afterwards. That was just so special. And then, of course, we had these events that you put on in the Messiah and the singing competition. I've done some recording as well. I've recorded more Leclerc sonatas, and it's been a fantastic thing to have as a focus for me. I'm not very good at practicing things for the sake of practicing them. I desperately need an end point, something in the diary, and that was hard not having that a lot of the time. I suppose I spent quite a bit of time with solo Bach at the beginning of the lockdown. It was nice to spend that time without an end point for that, but just doing it. I was lucky also to have a wife who's a musician. We play together a lot, and we could sort of keep each other going. That I was very conscious of those who were, on their own and a bit cut off from other people, and I did make a point of keeping in touch with people to see how they were getting on. Sort of mutual encouragement was really necessary, I think.
Great, thank you, Adrian. So quite a trying time for all of you, but you seem to have coped, kept your kind of spirits up and maintain that kind of musical camaraderie. I think that, which is so important. My next question is a kind of technical one, and I'll start with you, Adrian. I'm sure our audiences would love to know, and I know we've got lots of experts, but this is aimed more at the kind of lay people. The key differences between a Baroque violin and a modern violin. And oh joy of joys, we're going to have some practical demonstrations now, because Adrian's got his Baroque violin and Kathryn has got her modern violin, and Rachel's got a whole array of beautiful instruments behind her. So between we have a feast for the ears and the eyes, I think. So Adrian, if we start with you, please.
Okay, I'll just pick up my violin, which is here. I hope you can see this reasonably well. The bow is a big difference. The Baroque bow from the modern. It's simply so much lighter, and it's got less wood in it. It's got fewer hairs, but also it's very unequal. It's very weak at the tip, and much stronger at the heel. And the development of the modern bow, which came into being sort of towards the end of the 18th century, after Handel's death, that was a gradual process of change. But the idea, one is taught as a modern player that one should learn to make one's up bows as strong as one's down bows. Even if you don't necessarily play that way all the time, you should have the capability. And this Baroque bow is just not designed to do that. So you enjoy the inequality. And I suppose you could extend that to the idea that maybe in general society was a bit more unequal, and go with that. The bow makes so much difference. It's really important to realize that I've found whenever I've given a masterclass to modern players, and particularly if they're playing some solo Bach, if I just put this bow into their hand, it changes the way they play immediately. It's really astonishing, the difference. So you just get this. That inequality of emphasis. That very much goes with words. But then I can just tell you also technically about the violin, the main body of the violin. The neck is a big change. In Baroque instruments, the neck was parallel with the body of the instrument. And yes, later on, around the sort of early 19th century, a lot of those old instruments were changed, and this is a big operation. The old neck was taken out and a brand new one put in at an angle a bit back from the body of the instrument. This was to produce a greater angle onto the bridge, and therefore a greater force. And concert halls were getting bigger, orchestras were getting bigger, more sound was wanted, more projection, soloists wanted to make a bigger sound. So, I mean, there are various other technical differences. I suppose one should mention also the strings, the gut strings rather than metal, which came in during the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War. And the gut strings have a very, very different feel to them. They respond in a very different way. There's more different colors. They're perhaps slightly less immediate than a modern steel string. A more natural substance, I suppose. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then turning to you, Kath, and the modern violin that you're holding.
Yes, although this is it is actually a violin from the late 17th century. But it did have the operation that Adrian was talking about. So the neck was literally broken off and reset. The bridge here is much higher, as you can see. And as orchestras got bigger, wind instruments and brass instruments were changing, composers were making more demands. And as Adrian said, we were encouraged and instructed to make a more sustained sound. So again, more tension. I have synthetic strings on here. They're not even, they haven't, some strings have a gut core with metal wound very tightly, but these are just fake. So, and the E string sounds horrible like that, but I'll just play, you'll notice as well the pitch was different. If Adrian, do you want to just play something? And on a modern violin, so much brighter sound. Pitch is a whole grey area, isn't it, Adrian? That we could have a whole nother webinar on that. Yes. Also, various bits of scaffolding were added, like a chin rest here, and I have a shoulder rest that I put on when the music is more demanding in terms of the register, and I'm playing up high and very, very fast. I have a little tiny adjuster here, so rather than tuning with the pegs, I can do very fine adjustments with a metal adjuster. But the basic shape of the violin hasn't changed. It's just everything that was done to it to make a different sound. And the bow, as Adrian said, I don't know if you can see the point of my bow here is a completely different shape from Adrian's, which is very tapered. And so it has a concave shape, so it adds more strength in the upper half, so I'm able to produce more sound. And this has got lots of metal on the bottom. It's actually gold mounted, this bow, rather nice. 19th century French bow.
Great, thank you. We have had a question from Ben Parry. Does the lighter Baroque bow make it easier to play the music? Easier in inverted commas.
Yes. Composers at that time were incredibly, as they still are, incredibly practical people. They were writing for the instruments they had.
Sorry, Adrian, your voice has become a bit muffled, I think, since you picked up the violin. Are you further away from the mic or no?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
That's strange. Is that better?
A bit better, yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, so Bach and Handel were writing for the instruments that they had at that time. I'm often reminded by my wife that the flute was a very new instrument at that time, and therefore these composers were writing for new instruments. And they didn't have it in their heads of what might happen in 100 years' time to the technology of they were just writing practically for what they had. But the lightness of the bow does make the articulation so easy. You have to work much less hard. I'm very encouraging of people to play Baroque music on modern instruments. I wouldn't want to discourage people from playing the repertoire at all, but I do think they would learn so much from trying on a Baroque instrument and with the equipment, because you just learn so much about the music to do that. Yeah.
Kathryn, you
yes,
had a point.
I also think it leads on from what Adrian was saying, that the shape of the bow and the way the notes are tapered and decay, I think that must be a clue as to how people would have phrased the notes in the 18th century. It must give us an idea of how they actually phrase, and also that we were, certainly in a piece like Messiah, we're trying to phrase as the singers are singing. So I think the instruments themselves are a big clue to that.
That's terrific. Thank you. Yeah. And Rachel, you have to talk to us about this splendid array of instruments behind you. You were showing me earlier on your viola d'amore as well, and I'd learned a new word, the flame. I didn't realize that the holes, effectively, that's what they're called. And you've got a splendid example of that.
Shall I grab it?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm sure lots of people are familiar with this instrument, which has 14 strings, so 7 on which you play. Oh dear. And then 7 on which you don't, which are here. Now, this instrument is not one of the instruments that joined in the scales at 9:30 routine. So my poor beloved d'amore has been much neglected, but yeah. This is the flame, F holes, as opposed to, Kathryn, would you mind showing up your...
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry.
So these are normally the shape of the sound holes, but on a d'amore they vary and you have different patterns. This is quite a common one. There's some speculation that the name viola d'amore could mean viola of love, as you would expect, or that it could mean da more, of the Moorish people. I like to think that maybe there is a connection between this instrument and the Middle East, and the rise of Islam through the West. So, that this instrument has a strange provenance. We don't really know.
And in fact, it's probably slightly further east than that, isn't it? Because if you look at Indian classical instruments, the sitar has the resonating strings underneath. And it's quite unusual for Western instruments to have those resonating strings. I think the d'amore is quite unique in that, isn't it? So I think possibly from India via the Middle East, because I think things like the oud do also have the resonating strings. So it's a fascinating thing. So maybe it is d'amore, not d'amore.
I'll probably get shot down in flames by the experts now, but I quite like the idea of it having this other life somewhere.
Yes, yeah. And some of the other instruments you have, do you want to talk about maybe one or two of the others?
Yeah, I just thought I'd so Adrian talks about pitch, so throughout Europe from 1500 onwards, there were different starting pitches for the A that we know and tune to. And so often when we're working with wind instruments, in particular, cornetti, sackbuts, we will use different pitches depending on where the music was written and when. And so in order that we don't have to keep detuning instruments, and the range can be from, I don't know, it's from sort of 392 to 465, so that's hertz. And so this range of violas are set at intervals between those pitches, and in order not to have to keep changing them and not to have to keep changing the stringing. So my earliest viola, that it's a replica of an early viola from about 1530, is this big one, which is a tenor viola, and it's tuned entirely in gut. And that's a replica of a Gasparo de Saro instrument in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington. And then the next one would be a replica of a Guarneri from 1664. And then a replica of a Joseph Guarneri later. It's a hybrid instrument which a maker made as a transitional instrument. We went to the Ashmolean Museum together, looked at the violas that are there in wearing white gloves in the day when they made you wear white gloves to look at things, and now I think they make you not wear white gloves to look at things because you'll drop them. But of course, would we drop instruments? Myself and a maker. But we were made to wear white gloves, which would have ensured we'd surely drop them then. But anyway, so this instrument we took measurements from various classical and transitional instruments in the Ashmolean and came up with this. And then moving on, then my modern viola is from about the late 18th century. And nobody's really sure of its provenance, but we think it's possibly German. We're not really sure, but it's a big modern viola, and my approach to playing it is very different to any of the others. So using a modern bow, obviously, and for the repertoire that it's designed for. Oh, there you go.
Great, thanks, Rachel. And we've had a couple of questions come through to you from the chat. Firstly, what's the range and tuning of the tenor viola? And the second question is, of all the wonderful instruments you've showed us, which is your favourite?
Oh, the range and tuning of that tenor viola. I see that question now. Okay, so this is at 392, and because the last project that I used this for was with the Gabrieli Consort. We recorded and performed King Arthur, so Purcell, and that's why we chose this pitch and this stringing. So everyone had gut. There was no metal string anywhere on the stage in the entire orchestra. That's why that one is at that pitch. And my favourite, I think it depends on the context. I love them all. I love playing the earlier violas because you get to play with cornetti and sackbuts, and I can't tell you how joyous that is to be in a line with a cornetto, viola, sackbut. That's the team. It's an absolutely wonderful place to be. It's a very happy place. And I don't know if I have a favourite. I think it's about context, actually. That would be answer the question.
Is it worth mentioning just that 440 is the standard modern pitch now? 415 has become a sort of traditional baroque pitch, which is a semitone lower, and 392 is a semitone below that. So 392, we're talking about a whole tone below modern pitch. 465 takes us up to a semitone above 440, but just to put a little bit of context into
Thanks, Adrian. I'm too tired to work that out today.
And obviously with the London Handel Orchestra, what we heard, the clip at the beginning, and when our audiences come, they're hearing at 4:15, aren't they, Adrian?
They are, yes. It's interesting that because we have a replica of Handel's organ in that church, but that came out at a pitch in between 4:15 and 4:40, and for a long time we couldn't actually use that organ because we weren't generally playing at that pitch orchestrally, so it could only be heard as a solo instrument. But it was then adapted to 4:15, so we do play with it quite a lot now.
Yeah, thank you. So I've got my last question for the panel. So if you, the audience, could be thinking about questions that you want to put through the chat, and I'm happy to ask them on your behalf. But my final question, and I'll start with Kathryn this time, is why do you think Messiah is still popular? Here it is. It was written nearly 300 years ago. You know, we're in a largely secular society, and this is a work entirely based on the Old and New Testament. And yet, you know, we had 260,000 people from all over the world viewing our Messiah Reimagined. So clearly it still has a resonance today for so many people. Why do you think that is?
It's fantastic. It's a fantastic piece. And I think Handel was very, very clever, wasn't he? And he, as a sort of commercial composer, he adapted to what people wanted to hear. So when operas weren't so popular anymore, he switched to oratorios, and it's a fantastic story. It's very singable and it's very playable. So we as players, particularly thinking about the choruses, you know, we shadow the vocal lines in the choir. So we have soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and that is a sense of kind of togetherness and unity. Although I have to say that I have played in orchestras where the second violins don't realize that they're playing the same line as the alto section, but that's another story. And I've done Messiah with fantastic orchestras like the London Handel Orchestra. I've played it with a local choral society with string quartet and electric keyboard, and it was still fantastic. It just has this incredible sense of joy, and when you get to the final amen, it's just unbeatable. I think I love it. It's a desert island-esque.
So there's a kind of inherent adaptability in the piece that maybe even Handel, genius though that he was, didn't foresee, and which we in subsequent generations have kind of warmed to. Rachel, same question to you. 300 years on, why is it still popular, this work?
I think everyone loves drama, and what you're not expecting perhaps when you go to a concert hall with no costumes and no set, you know, you're thinking, well, how dramatic can this be? Is it just the music that I'm going to have, you know, at me? But it's not. It's the dramatization of the doctrine, and everyone likes a good story, and everyone loves to be engaged with it, and you cannot fail to engage with the drama of the story, and to allow yourself the flexibility to take yourself away during each aria or during each chorus, and meditate on what you're listening to. I think it's an incredible. Nobody could fail to be engaged by this piece.
And on the drama, obviously it got Mr. Handel into trouble in the early days, didn't it? Because he could only perform it in theatres. You know, the churches thought it was too secular, too dramatic a work. It wasn't penitential enough, really. Yes, Kathryn.
Sorry, I know I'm interrupting, but we did a performance with Catherine Wynne-Rogers some years ago, and it was the most extraordinary performance of He Was Despised that I've ever played in. It was absolutely amazing. And I talked to her afterwards, and Handel wrote that part, she told me, for an actress who could sing rather than for a singer who could act a bit. So sorry, that was a little tangential.
No, but it's so true. It was Susanna Sibber, of course, and she had fled London because people were gossiping about the scandal that she was embroiled with. And, you know, famously she sang "He was despised," and the clergyman stood up and said, "Woman, for this thy sins are forgiven thee," which is the words that Jesus said to the adulterous woman. And it was like a public acknowledgement that she was rehabilitated into society, and she came back to London, had a really successful career, and is buried in Westminster Abbey now. So it's a story of this piece, but also of the individuals that sang it. So and she was an actress, and she was known to move people with her voice, even though it wasn't the best voice, because she could communicate so well. It's extraordinary. Yeah. Adrian, question to you. Why do you think, I mean, you've led the orchestra in countless versions of this piece, and yet it's so popular still. Why is that?
It is. And actually for me, my first encounter with Messiah was as a singer, because I sang it as a boy chorister 4 times at St. Paul's Cathedral when I was from the age of 9. So it's in my blood from a young age. I think also for me, Handel had this amazing ability to tap into wherever he was. I think of when he went to Rome. There's so much of the music he produced at that time that despite him being a German Protestant, he somehow manages to make himself sound like a Roman Catholic. He picked up, his ears were so well attuned to his surroundings, and he picked up on resonances. And he did the same in England, and he somehow managed to tap into a mood and the culture, and pick up. You hear hints of Purcell's music and all those sorts of things. The Amen at the end. I mean, there's something so English about that, and I'm constantly amazed by Handel and how he did these things, how he absorbed and reinvented these ideas. I wanted to mention one other thing that I've just discovered recently, because some of the research I'm doing is into Baroque dance. We've been looking at the Siciliana, and Handel uses the Siciliana. It's basically a shepherd's song. Generally, it's a bit mournful because shepherds tend to be on their own an awful lot of the time. But actually, the shepherd influence is, of course, very connected with Jesus, with Christmas. We have the Pifa in the Messiah, but we have. I'm just going to play this to you, if I may. This is a Roman traditional sort of Christmas song from the Roman area. You might hear the connection with. It's amazing. I mean, Handel must have heard that when he was in Rome those years before, and it must have stayed with him. I just love these connections that he made. There's also that Siciliana thing is you then also get in the Matthew Passion with Peter's denial, which is for such a different sort of context. But then there's also those resonances with shepherds, with Jesus, the sacrificial lamb, all those sorts of resonances. So all these composers, they picked up on all these different ideas, and Handel in particular. It's so appropriate, that music for that moment. That ability, I think that's why we love it so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So turning to questions from the audience, they're coming quite thick and fast now. So Janice Liversidge, one of our trustees, has asked, which piece of Handel are you looking forward to playing in the next year? Kathryn, have you got a favourite bit of Handel that's coming up for you? Apart from Messiah on the 5th of April.
Obviously. Well, I'm really enjoying exploring Handel's Tenor music with, I mentioned before, the amazing Brook Street Band, named after the street where Handel lived, of course. And I know, Samir, that they have played in the Handel Festival for many years. And 2 violins, flute, harpsichord, and cello, of course. So I'm really loving that and looking forward to exploring that.
Great. And Adrian, you've been recording some Leclerc, but presumably there's quite a lot of Handel on the horizon for you as well.
There is. Well, I mean, what we should have just performed is the Italian version of Il Trionfo. We had planned that, hadn't we, for probably around this time, and I'm very much hoping that we'll be able to bring that back later.
Yeah,
in the year.
we're losing you again slightly, Adrian. I think if you just come slightly closer to the screen.
Gosh, I feel as though I'm very close already, but sorry, I'm not quite sure what you've heard, but Il Trionfo was the Italian version of what we nearly performed a year ago.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's what we will do later in the year.
Yeah.
When the Handel Festival comes back.
Perfect. Yeah. And Rachel, same question to you. What Handel is there on the horizon for you?
Well, very little at the moment. I find it very difficult to look too far ahead in the diary, actually. It's really a question. I'm sure there is something there, and I just haven't really taken in what will be performed later in the year. I really, at the moment, we're trying to keep ourselves going musically from week to week without having to think too far ahead. And also, I think we've got into sadly, it's been the case that things have been programmed and then had to be cancelled because of the various lockdowns. And so I've found myself not being able to engage too far into the future with what might or might not happen. But yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Just mention that well, Rachel and I will be playing at Wigmore Hall on Monday, and we will be playing two Handel arias with Lucy Crowe. So do listen into that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. So Sandy Burnett had a question about Handel's music outside of the concert hall and churches. And you alluded to this already, Adrian, by saying he was absorbing the influences from the street and then putting that into it. But in terms of people playing Handel in their homes, they did this a lot. I mean, obviously Handel's house on Brook Street, he was constantly we've got written accounts of people being there for rehearsals and little preview performances and stuff like that. He was quite adept at breaking down the barriers, wasn't he?
He was, but I think also we should remember, of course, that they didn't have the technology. They didn't have radio, they didn't have television and internet. So the only way to reproduce concert performances was to do it yourself. To take up became the gentleman amateur, took up the flute in the 18th century, and therefore lots of arrangements were made. And we recorded some years ago a Handel at Home disc of these very arrangements. So that's how you got to know these pieces and got to enjoy them again, having heard them in the concert hall. Yes, absolutely.
Great, thank you. Ben Parry is asking, how did Lawrence Cummings, our musical director, manage to line up the virtual choirs? And yes, you're right, Ben, because you're a conductor, he had a click track. And in fact, am I right in thinking that the section leaders also had the click track in their ears? Or it was just Lawrence?
It was just Lawrence, yes. It was a virtuoso performance by him, it has to be said. He was coordinating the whole thing and trying to stop and start things at the right time and so on. I don't know to this day quite how he managed it, really. I think that was really complicated, and he brought it off amazingly.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I suppose it helped that you'd all been in the studio in August and you'd recorded the tracks, and those were the tracks that the choirs were singing along to. So the whole thing had, Lawrence presumably had a good memory of his own tempi. But even so, I mean, incredibly nerve-wracking to think that it was all kind of live, and at any moment it could have gone horribly wrong, and yet it didn't. It was all miraculous, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Just looking at the questions again here. Oh yes, this has been asked before, but I'll start with you, Rachel. What's your favourite bit of Messiah, or your favourite movement, or aria, or chorus?
incredibly niche, but towards the end of the Amen chorus, there is a scale which the violas and the first violins have in parallel fourth.
Wow.
And really, it doesn't get better than that.
we must, everyone's going to rush now and listen to those. How many bars before the end did you say it was?
I please forgive me. It's been a long day. But just whip open the score, you'll see it.
Yeah.
And of course, He Was Despised is for the orchestra, I think, well, speaking personally, is play that every time. Yeah,
but it's interesting you say that, because I mean, and Kathryn, you were saying earlier on about how you love being in sync with the singers. I mean, and Kathryn, does that apply to you in terms of your favorite movement? Is it because you're totally in sync with the soloist and the singers?
I love the imagery that Handel writes into the violin parts. I can speak about first and second violin parts, but just the so we talked about the pifa and the shepherds, and that's a quite I can't think of the word, but there are lots and lots of different opinions. It's controversial, the tempo, isn't it? I have done it very, very slowly, but more and more I think we like to think that it's, as Adrian was saying about Sicilian, a bit more jolly with the shepherds, but and suddenly with the angels, just before the sopranos, and it just absolutely magical. It's magical. It's so descriptive, and the imagery is incredible. But I think nothing beats the last few bars where the trumpets and timps come in at the end of the Amen. Oh my goodness, every time.
Yes, wonderful. And Adrian, it's a bit invidious to ask the leader of the orchestra what his favorite bit or section is, but do you have a favorite? Or
I suppose I have sort of two bits, if you like. Well, I mean, one is All We Like Sheep Have Gone Astray, which I think is just a comical masterpiece. The fact that the lines of the music just go in and out and up and down and don't go anywhere is so symbolic of the fact that we're all sort of lost and don't know where we're going. I think that's quite brilliant. And then I suppose I Know That My Redeemer Liveth is such a special moment. The key, and just the sheer beauty of that moment. It's there's little to beat that, I think.
Yes, and Joanne Lunn's rendition of that. I mean, I admit I was in tears in St George's, Hanover Square on the 3rd of December, because she really committed to it. I mean, you really felt she totally believed. I have no idea whether she is a practicing Christian or not, but she really came across as, this was something she utterly believed, and it came through in her voice as well. So that was incredible. I think we've got time for one more question, and if that's not going to come from the audience in the next few seconds. Oh yes, it's back to the Ben and Sandy show again. Do we know if Handel? Oh, let me ask Sandy's question first. Sorry. What can we do to draw people who know the Messiah backwards and the Matthew Passion into the rest of the Baroque repertoire? So maybe this, because we've only got a few minutes, you can answer both questions. So how can we use this piece to draw people back to understand the rest of the Baroque repertoire? And do we know if Handel was pleased with the piece? He kept rewriting it, and I wonder if he couldn't leave it alone, asks Ben Parry. So Rachel, let's start with you.
Well, I'm not an academic, but I have been to the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, where there are the incipits of all Handel's, all the bits and pieces that people didn't particularly know what to do with when he died, and there are volumes and volumes and volumes and volumes of these. And I've had the privilege of looking through quite a few of them, and there are scratchings out and little bits of Messiah in there. You see, and to see that in his hand in ink, and he saved paper like anything. I mean, one piece of paper will have reference to maybe 5 different pieces. You'll think, oh, that's a bit of that and that's a bit of this, but you know, just seeing that, and we have this. You know, you're saying he rewrote it many times. I don't know about that, but he, you know, he was certainly working with it for a long time, and yeah. I don't know what the answer is, other than it's always wonderful to look at a composer's hand, and it does inform you.
Yes, and also it's not just a question of him perfecting or changing what he didn't like or refining stuff. It was about the personnel as well, wasn't it? It was the soloists that were available. And Adrian, possibly not just the vocal soloists, but also the instrumentalists that he had.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, he did write vocal music very much like somebody making a bespoke suit for a tailor. And if he had different singers, he would happily almost get rid of certain arias and just bring in something completely new that would be appropriate and bring out the qualities of the singers that he had. So that was a lot to do with the tinkering with, you know, the various versions of different pieces. Sometimes there was just a different context. So I think that's very important. This question about, you know, how do we bring people to other Baroque repertoire is something that really resonates with me, because I feel that I understand so much more about Handel and Bach, having learnt all their contemporaries, and you know, Bach was writing out music from other composers to learn about it. Vivaldi, L'Harmonica, those sorts of pieces, he was learning from other people all the time. We have sometimes this idea that glorified Bach, that he somehow everything was perfect already and he just had to write it down, but he learned from others. And Handel was, you know, we all know about his borrowings, both from himself and other people. He was just snatching brilliant ideas from Telemann and Corelli and everyone else. I think as a festival, we should do a lot. I mean, I've tried in programs over the years to try and set Handel in the context of all these other composers, and you know, I love them all so much that I want people to hear them.
Great, thanks. And then finally to you, Kathryn, and we have to close at this point. So those 2 questions. Firstly, for those people that know Messiah really well, how do we persuade them to listen to other Baroque repertoire? And secondly, you know, why do you think it was that Handel kind of tinkered with the piece so much in his own lifetime?
Funny question. I know Ben asked this a lot, you know, of composers. Oh, do you think he thought, yeah, that's really good? Or was it just, you know, in context, you know, with was it very popular when it was first written? Did, you know, I'm going to go actually to the other question about the programming, and I'd just like to say that the Handel Festival, I think, is a fantastic vehicle for exploring other composers, and in my experience of playing in events in the festival, the programming has been really inspiring. I remember a few years ago doing the Judgment of Paris by Arne, and it, you know, it was packed. The concert was packed, and people absolutely loved it. Again, it was very dramatic, wasn't it, performance? But I've played pieces that I hadn't known before, and I think as and when we're allowed to perform live again, we can look forward to, I think that's what your programming is always really inspiring, I think.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. So on that lovely note, we shall leave on a lovely positive note. It's been a pleasure to have you all here. And if you'd like to kind of show your online appreciation for our wonderful musicians, Adrian, Rachel and Kathryn, thank you for joining us. And if you would like to leave gracefully now, you're invited to do so. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Well done.
Thank you, Samir.
Thank you, Samir.
Thank you, Samir.